All right, welcome back to part 4, and this is the final part of this particular module. Again, we're dealing with things you have to know about the Real Estate Commission and what are the licensing requirements in South Carolina. Again, there's 4 parts to it, this being the last one, but there are 9 questions coming on the state exam coming out of this particular module, parts 1 through 4 here. So it's not a lot of information, but again, 9 questions coming out of this. Again, there's 35 questions total for the state portion, and 9 of those are coming right here. So this is important. So what's next? Now we need to talk about the different statuses that your license can be in. And there are 5 different statuses, some good, some not so good, okay? But obviously make sure you know each status and the difference in these statuses. But the first one is the revoked status. And I'm sure you would guess that's probably not a good status at all. Not very career enhancing if your license is ever revoked. Now, if it is revoked, you cannot apply to get it back for a minimum of 3 years. And I would remember that for test purposes. If it's revoked, you're not even going to get a chance to get it back for at least 3 years. Now, I want to be clear on something. If your license ever gets revoked, it's probably gone. You're probably not getting it back. But that's not to say you can't get it back. You will have to wait out that 3-year period. But then if you decide you want to try to get it back, then you will have to personally appear before the Real Estate Commission. Y'all remember that 10-member panel, the 10 commissioners? You will have to stand before them in person. And basically what they're requiring you to do is submit proof of trustworthiness and honesty. In other words, you got to convince them that you are no longer a threat to the public, because obviously you did something to jeopardize or threaten the public by the way you were practicing. Otherwise, your license would not have been revoked. But if you can prove that you are a new person, you realize what you did was wrong, that ain't gonna happen again, then they may give you another chance. But again, remember, you got to wait at least 3 years before you can even do that. Now, assuming the commission agrees to reinstate your license, they will put some qualifying criteria on you. You got to do this, and this, whatever those things might be. And then once you complete all the criteria, then they'll reinstate your license. The criteria, kind of differs from one person to the next when they allow you to do this. And it really depends on what you did to lose your license to begin with. They may tell you got to take all the classes all over again. They may just tell you to take some specialized training in certain areas. But one thing everybody will have to do is you will have to take and pass that state exam again. Everybody, that's a requirement for everybody. But in addition to passing the exam, they may put some other criteria that you got to fulfill before they'll reinstate your license. But that's the revoked status. But then we look at this inactive status. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with this status. And my guess is most licensees at some point in their career will, for one reason or another, decide to put their license on inactive. What you'll see happen here a lot is, a lot of people get their license and maybe they still have a full-time job and maybe some family things are going on, but at the end of the day, they just don't have time to practice real estate. Just don't have time to do it. And one of the things you will find that having a real estate license may not be that cheap. And a lot of that's got to do with the company you decide to hang your license with. But different companies charge different fees for different things. And, just to keep your license active, it costs money. And that may not be a whole lot of money, but I'm telling you, you keep paying these fees month in and month out. Some are monthly, some are annual and so forth. But you may just get tired of paying all these fees and you just don't have the time to do real estate right now. Well, an option for you would just be to put your license on inactive status. Now, if it's inactive, for all intents and purposes, you're no longer licensed. So you cannot be practicing real estate while it's inactive. You cannot do referral fee. You can't do anything. Referrals, nothing, if your license is inactive. Again, for all intents and purposes, you're no longer licensed. But here's the good news. Well, first of all, let me go back to, part of that good news would be, because you're really you don't have an active license, you don't have to pay these fees. In fact, there are no fees you have to pay if your license is inactive. With the exception of one, the only fee you'll ever have to pay on inactive is the renewal fee. You still have to renew your license, and we'll talk more about this on the next slide, but you got to renew your license every 2 years. It's like $25 or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it's not that much. But as long as you continue paying that renewal fee, then your license will stay inactive, and it can stay that way indefinitely. Maybe you decide to leave it there for a year. Maybe you decide to leave it there for 30 years. But as long as it's inactive, what's really nice about this is, when and if you decide you want to get back into it, I want to do real estate now, all you have to do is tell the commission to put your license back on active status. And again, as long as you have it inactive and you've been renewing it every 2 years, you can just put your license back on inactive status. Back on active status and start practicing. So there's no more, so you don't have to redo all these training classes again. It's crazy not to put your license inactive. Don't ever let it expire or just get rid of it. Don't do that. You work too hard to get it. You just never know what the future holds when you may decide later that you want to get it back. And if you got it sitting there inactive, all you got to do is just put it back active. That's all there is to it. So I think that's a pretty good status for some. But then here's the active status. Obviously this is the only status that your license can be in if you're practicing real estate. If you're receiving compensation of any kind. Recall, if it's not active, you cannot charge referral fees. You can't do any of that stuff. You can only do anything real estate related with an active real estate license. Now, to keep your license active, you have to renew it. That's what I was saying a minute ago. You got to renew it by June 30th every 2 years. I guarantee you that's a test question. When do you have to renew your license? No later than June 30th, every 2 years. I would certainly remember that. But now, is it possible that June 30th could roll around and you just forget to renew your license? I don't know how that happens. I don't know how you can forget to do something like that. But I will tell you, it happens. There's a lot of agents every year having this problem. So look, if June 30th, once midnight, June 30th rolls around and you still have not renewed your license, that's going to be the fourth status, and that's the lapsed status. Now, this one's not it's not terrible status, but it ain't a good status either. Again, if it's lapsed, that means your license is no longer active. Therefore, you better not be practicing real estate. And this is where a lot of agents get in trouble. Maybe their license lapsed because they forgot to renew it, didn't even realize it was lapsed. but they're still working with these buyers or sellers, going to closing and whatnot. Y'all, and I'm telling you, when you do that, we talked about this in, I think it was like part 2 of this module. Y'all, you're practicing real estate without a license. You remember what the penalty is if you get caught practicing without a license? Up to $500 fine and or 6 months in prison, or both. Okay, so a little review there. But here's the good news. Even though it may lapse, y'all, you can still renew your license even though it has lapsed. It's just you better not be practicing real estate between the time it actually lapsed and the time you finally get around to renewing it. Okay. The bad news is you will have to pay late fees. So not only do you still have to pay the renewal fee, now you're paying late fees. And y'all, there is no free time. Y'all, I don't know why they like to try to catch you on that on the state exam, but they'll try to. Maybe trying to ask you a question like, well, it did lapse on at midnight, but at 7 o'clock when they woke up the next morning, they thought about it and they went ahead and renewed it. Is there still a late fee for that? Yes. Y'all, at midnight, June 30th, it lapses, and y'all, at the moment it's lapsed, you will be paying late fees. There's no free time here. Zero. Now, the interesting thing about this, y'all, the longer you allow the license to be lapsed, the more the late fee is going to cost. Y'all, so that late fee gets more and more and more the longer you allow it to stay in a lapsed status. So you don't want to do that too long either. Now, the law says they will allow you to still renew the license for up to 6 months. So if you think about it, y'all, if it lapses midnight June 30th, 6 months later it would be December 30th, right? So basically you got till the end of the year to still renew the license. It's just going to be a lot more expensive, y'all, with the late fees and whatnot. But y'all, after December 30th, y'all, if you still have not renewed your license, that's going to be the last status, and that's canceled. So if your license is canceled, it's gone. You're not getting it back. You cannot renew it. Y'all, the only way you can get it back is you got to start all over again. And that's not going to be fun. Meaning you got to take all the classes all over again. You got to pass the exams again. Y'all, so don't let that happen. And also, for what it's worth, and make sure you understand this too, y'all, if your license does lapse, you cannot put a lapsed license on inactive status. Okay? So if it lapses, then you're going to still have to pay all the fees to get it put back in active status. And then if you want to put it inactive, you can. But you have to have an active license before you can decide to go inactive. Y'all, a lot of people have noticed that their license lapsed, but the year's running out and they don't want to get it canceled. So they just try to put it on inactive to save them, and you're not going to be allowed to do that. So you got to have an active license before you can go inactive. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about non-resident licensees. Obviously what they're talking about here are real estate agents that are maybe residents or live in a different state, but they're also licensed in South Carolina. You could be licensed in multiple states, okay? Obviously you're only living in one of them. So if you don't live here, but yet you're licensed here, then you're considered a non-resident licensee. And to get a non-resident license, assuming you're licensed in some other state, then again, all you have to do to be licensed here is just pass the state portion of our state exam. Now, if you look there in paragraph B on the slide, two things here are kind of important. One, again, this is just for non-residents. But if I'm a non-resident, you're not going to be required to maintain a place of business in South Carolina as long as you have a place of business in your resident state. So in other words, you won't have to have an office in both states. Okay? If you got an office in your resident state, you do not have to open another office in the other state, in South Carolina. You can, but you don't have to. But that next sentence, I suspect, will absolutely be on the exam. Non-residents must sign what we call an irrevocable consent form, or sometimes it's called an irrevocable consent to suit. All non-residents must sign this document. And basically by signing this document, what you're saying is this. Obviously, the laws in South Carolina, in some cases, may be the same or very similar to the laws in other states. But even though the laws might be similar, the penalties, if you violate the law, will likely be different. Just for example, you do something wrong. Let's say again, you got a licensee in Florida, and they do something that violates law in Florida. That might just be a slap on the hand. But if you do that same thing wrong in South Carolina, our law says the penalty is going to be, we're going to cut your hand off. Well, guess what? By signing this irrevocable consent form, you're agreeing to take whatever the punishment is in our state, not necessarily what it would have been in your resident state. Okay? So that, remember what that irrevocable consent form is, because you're probably going to see that again on the exam. And then in paragraph C, if you ever relocate, you change your address. Maybe they decide, I'm doing more business in South Carolina right now, so I'm just going to move from Florida to South Carolina. Well, obviously, then you're no longer a non-resident. You're now a resident of South Carolina, and now you're a non-resident in Florida. So you'd have to notify both real estate commissions that you've now changed residences. And you have 30 days to do that, right? Remember, in fact, we said that earlier in this module. If your address changes, you got 30 days to update that information with the real estate commission. You got to keep all that stuff current. Okay, so that's... All right, so now we need to talk about the conditions to renew your license. We know we talked about this a little bit ago. You got to renew your license by June 30th every 2 years. Well, one of the conditions to do that is you have to complete some continuing education training. And depending on the type of license you have will determine the type of, or the type of training. Look, everybody has to do the 10 hours, okay? The question is, what kind of classes must you take? And again, that's going to depend on the type of license, and that's what we're looking at here on this slide. But if you have a salesperson or broker's license, again, you got to complete 10 hours. And that's not many hours over a 2-year period, okay? So you got 2 years to take 10 hours of CE, continuing ed. You can get it, you can really take it anywhere. There are plenty of schools, providers. You can do it in a classroom, you can do it online. I believe we here at the Real Estate School for Success have the best, and I hope you'll come and take it with us, either in the classroom or some of our online. I'll tell you, our online continuing ed is very similar to what I'm doing right here, right now. It's me. I'll be the one teaching it. And it's not just one of these national companies that just not very good, to be honest with you. That's my opinion. All right. So salesperson and broker, you got to do the 10 hours. But of the 10 hours, there's a 4-hour core class that's mandatory for every real estate agent. Every real estate agent must take the 4-hour core class which is part of the 10 hours. So in essence, you got the 4-hour core, which core means mandatory. And then there's an additional 6 hours that we call elective credit that you can just pick and choose from. Y'all, we've got some 2-hour classes, and we got some 4-hour classes. And basically, you can see them on our website. Y'all, you can just pick and choose whichever ones you want to take. But just make sure you get the 4-hour core and then 6 hours of additional elective credit, because you got to have a total of 10 before you can renew your license. Now, if you're a broker in charge, a little bit different for the brokers in charge. Now, they also have to do 10 hours of continuing education. But they don't have just 4 hours of core. They have 8 hours that's core. Because there's, like I said earlier, y'all, everybody has to take that 4-hour mandated core class. Y'all, that's included with the brokers in charge as well. But in addition to that, a broker in charge also has to take what they call a broker in charge class, which is another 4-hour mandatory course. So for a broker in charge, between those two, that's already 8 hours of mandatory education they got to take. So that means they only have 2 hours of elective that they can pick and choose whatever they want to take. But again, everyone still has to do the 10 hours. Okay, make sure you got a total of 10, but just make sure that you've got your mandatory classes included in that 10. All right. Now, the very last bullet on this slide, y'all, you need to pay attention to this, where it says all licensees must be renewed biannually. Y'all, look at that last word there, biannually. Well, what does biannually mean? Every 2 years, okay? That's what I've been saying. Y'all, you got to renew your license by June 30th every 2 years, which is considered biannually. Now, if you're looking at that word on the slide, y'all, biannually, y'all, and pay attention to the third letter, which is E, B-I-E, biannually. Y'all, if I took that E out and replaced it with an A, now the word becomes biannually. And what does biannually mean? Twice a year. Y'all, be careful with this on the state exam. Y'all, if you're not paying attention to the question, to the words, y'all, this is where they'll get you. Y'all, they could have in the question, or maybe a possible answer, where they'll say you got to take 10 hours of continuing education biannually. Y'all, that's wrong. It's biannually. Yo, so not only are you looking for trick words in the question, now apparently you got to pay attention to trick letters in the question. But one letter in that word changes everything, right? So just be careful with that. All right. Y'all, now there are some exemptions for some, meaning they don't have to take some continuing education. Y'all, there are some partial exemptions, but then there's also some full exemptions, and we're going to take a look at this. And right now we look at the partial exemption. Well, what does that mean? Y'all, partial exemption means you're exempt from having to take any elective credit hours. You still have to take all the core or the mandatory hours, but you are exempt from the remaining elective hours. So who gets this exemption? Any licensee with 25 years experience. Now, y'all, that's with an active license. So if 5 of those years you were on inactive, y'all, that's not going to count. You got to have 25 years of active licensure. Y'all, that means you got to be practicing a little while to get a partial exemption. Y'all, because again, you still have to take the mandatory courses, and you see them listed there, so I'm not going to go through them all again. So partial means you got to take the mandatory courses, but you're exempt from any elective hours. But then there's the full exemption, meaning no, you don't have to take any continuing ed, And y'all, there's 4 ways you might qualify for this. Y'all, number 1, any licensee completing a post-license course during that 2-year period. Y'all, say for example, you've been licensed for at least 3 years or more, and you decide to take the broker course because you want to get your broker license. Well, obviously the broker course is a post-licensing course, and the broker course is 60 hours. Y'all, that's way more than the 10 hours that's required. So in essence, by taking that course, you can use that in lieu of the continuing education. So you'd be exempt from taking the continuing ed. Then number 2, if you're on inactive status, then you're exempt from continuing ed. Y'all, we talked about this earlier, but y'all, for all intensive purposes, if you're inactive, then you're no longer licensed, right? So you don't have to take any continuing education while you are inactive. Now here's the one caveat that you might want to pay attention to here. When you decide to put your license back on active status, take it off inactive and put it back on active. If you had it inactive for more than 2 years, and it doesn't matter how long, any amount of time over 2 years, before you can go back to active, you will have to do 10 hours of continuing education, okay? People ask me, so every 2 hours every 2 years that it was inactive, I got to do a 10 hour? No, not for every 2 years it was inactive. It's just if it was inactive for more than 2 years, whether it be 2 years or 30 years. Doesn't matter how long, anything over 2, you just have to do 10 hours of CE, and then you can put it back on active status. But just know, while it's inactive, you do not have to take CE, okay? And then number 3, non-resident licensees, as long as they completed all their continuing ed requirements in their resident state. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If I did all my CE in Florida, why would I have to go do it again in South Carolina? No, as long as you did it, met all the requirements in your resident state, then you don't have to do it over again in your non-resident state. And then, this last one here, another full exemption is if you have 25 years active experience and 65 years of age. So once you get old and a lot of experience, then you can get a full exemption. I guess they decide once you're 65, there's nothing else you can learn. So you don't have to take continuing ed. But if all you got is if you got 25 years and you're still 50, all you get's the partial exemption, right? Full exemption, 25 years experience and 65 years of age. Now, some other things is saying here about the continuing ed. Is it possible you could take more than the 10 hours required every 2 years? Yes, and that's awesome. But the law says you cannot carry any excess hours over into the next period. So every 2 years you're starting over again, no matter how many hours you took in the previous period. But then in number 2, what they're saying here is this. Again, say June 30th is popping up on us. We need to renew our license, and we have not completed the continuing ed. And maybe there's just no way you can get it done now. You just waited too late, and you're not going to be able to do the CE before June 30th comes about. Well, here's something you can do, which I think is a very good thing the state allows you to do. Even though you have not completed your CE, you still need to go ahead and fill out the renewal, submit your renewal application, pay the renewal fee. And again, you need to do this before midnight, June 30th. But on the application, it asks you, have you completed all required continuing education? Now, obviously, if you haven't taken your CE, you better check no. I'm just telling you, you will get caught here. If you try to lie, saying I've completed it and you haven't, you're going to lose your license over that. They will catch you. I promise you, you will not get away with that. So y'all just check, no, I have not completed it yet. Even though, anyway, I won't go there. Just check no. Now, obviously, if you check no, are they going to renew your license? No. But here's the good news. Just simply by paying the renewal fee and submitting your renewal application, if you have not done the CE, then come midnight June 30th, the Real Estate Commission will just automatically put your license on inactive status. Y'all, that's good because that means now your license does not lapse. Now you're not having to pay any late fees. Now it is inactive, which means you better not be practicing real estate after midnight June 30th. But at least you can go ahead and get your continuing education completed. And once it's completed, notify the commission, I've now completed it. Please put my license back on active status, and they'll be glad to do so. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good thing there. Okie dokie. Well, y'all, hopefully you enjoyed this module. Again, there's 4 parts to it. Out of the 4 parts, you're going to get 9 questions. That's where 9 of the 35 questions are coming from. And y'all, we're going to have some other videos dealing with the other, 26 questions here coming up soon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. And shine for Jesus.